The frozen silence. The wind screamed across the white land, carrying ice like blades that cut through the skin. The alien world was endless snow, endless storms, and endless silence. No birds, no animals, no warmth. Only the sound of the storm filled the air. In that storm, a small figure moved slowly, stumbling step by step. It was a child. Her skin was pale and faintly glowing under the moonlight. Her big alien eyes, once full of life, were now weak and heavy with tears. Her thin body shook with every gust of cold air. She had no coat, no shoes, nothing but torn cloth wrapped around her shoulders. She was too small to fight against the cold. Her legs trembled, and her breath came out as white fog that quickly vanished. She pressed her hands together, but they were blue and stiff. She looked around the endless snow, searching for someone, anyone, but there was no one. She had been left alone. Her people had called her weak. They said she would never grow strong. They said she was a burden, and in this cruel land, the weak had no place. So, they abandoned her in the storm, leaving her to the ice. The child fell to her knees, her small fingers digging into the frozen ground. She wanted to cry, but even her tears turned to ice on her cheeks. She whispered a word in her alien tongue, perhaps calling for her mother, perhaps for anyone to hear, but only the storm answered back. Her body grew heavy, and she could not stand anymore. She curled up in the snow, trying to protect herself from the wind. She thought of the warm fire she once sat near, the songs she once heard in her village, but those were only memories now. Her eyes closed, her breathing slowed. She was fading into the frozen silence. Then, a sound. Not the roar of the storm, not the howl of the hunters that roamed the far mountains. It was different, heavy, slow, the sound of boots crushing through the sea. Now! The child forced her eyes open, blinking through frozen lashes. At first, she thought it was another vision, a dream before death. But the figure was real, a tall shape moving against the storm, carrying a light in his hand. It was a human. Wrapped in thick gear, his face hidden under glass and fabric, the human moved with effort but strength. The torch he carried burned brightly against the darkness of the blizzard. He looked around, scanning the storm, and then his eyes fell on her, this tiny glowing child curled in the snow. For a moment he stood still, shocked. He had not expected life here, not in this deathland. The human knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Her skin was like ice. Her lips moved, but no sound came. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A faint beat. She was alive, barely. The human looked around. The storm was growing worse. If he left her here, she would be gone in minutes. His mission, his safety, his supplies, all told him to walk away. She was not his kind. She was not his responsibility. But when he looked at her small face, he saw fear, he saw pain, and something inside him refused to let her die. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her fragile body. She shivered, her eyes flickering weakly. He lifted her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. She was as light as the snow he walked through. The storm roared louder, pushing against him, but the human leaned forward and marched on. His boots sank deep in the frozen ground, every step a battle. The torchlight shook with the wind, but he kept going. The child's head rested against his shoulder. She felt the warmth of his body, something she had not felt for so long. Her lips moved again, whispering a word he did not understand. He looked down and saw her glowing eyes staring at him with confusion and a faint spark of hope. "Hold on," he muttered, though he knew she couldn't understand his language. "You're not dying tonight." The blizzard howled, but he did not stop. The cold bit into his face. His arms ached from carrying her, but his steps never slowed. He had found her in the frozen silence, and he would not leave her to it. At last, through the curtain of snow, the outline of his small shelter appeared. A simple structure of metal and stone, half buried in ice, but it was safety. With the last of his strength, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Warmth greeted them. A fire burned weakly in the corner, and the room was quiet. He placed the child gently on a bed of blankets near the heater. Her skin was still cold, but color was beginning to return to her cheeks. The human removed his gloves and carefully rubbed her stiff fingers, trying to bring life back into them. She shivered, whispering again, her voice so faint it was almost nothing. He could not understand the words, but he understood the meaning, a plea for life. He nodded firmly. "You're safe now." The storm outside continued to rage, but inside that small shelter, The frozen silence had been broken. A human had chosen to save an alien child, and that choice would change everything. The fragile spark. Inside the small human shelter, the storm still screamed outside. The walls shook and the wind pressed hard against the door, but the fire inside gave a small circle of light and warmth. The alien child lay on a pile of blankets, her body still trembling, her lips pale, her breathing thin like smoke. The human knelt beside her, watching closely. He had seen wounded soldiers before. He had seen people on the edge of life. This child was the same, her life hanging on a thin thread. He pulled out a container of melted snow and touched it to her lips. At first, she did not move. Her body seemed too weak to even drink, but after a moment, her lips parted slightly and a drop of water passed inside. Her throat moved and she coughed softly. The human sighed in relief. At least she still fought to live. He cut small pieces of dried food, soft enough for her to swallow, and pressed them carefully against her mouth. Slowly, carefully, she took them. Her glowing eyes blinked open, staring at the strange face above her. The firelight showed him clearly now, a man with strong eyes, a rough beard, and skin burned from cold winds. His breath was heavy, his clothes wet from the storm, but his gaze was steady. The child did not understand him, but she felt something she had not felt for a long time: safety. She tried to speak. Her voice was broken, small, almost lost in the crackling fire. Why? The human leaned closer. He could not understand her language fully, but the tone of the word was clear. She was asking why he was helping her. He did not answer with words. Instead, he adjusted the blankets around her, tucked them tighter, and placed another piece of food in her hand. His action was enough. She stared at him, confusion mixing with wonder. Her people had told her stories of humans, stories of selfishness, of cruelty, of cold hearts. Humans, they said, were takers. They destroyed and never gave. That was why she had believed she would die alone, forgotten in the snow. But this human was different. The fire grew warmer, and her breathing began to steady. She lifted her hand, still weak, and placed it on his sleeve. The fabric was rough, but it was warm. She whispered something in her tongue again, words too faint to catch. He could only watch her lips move, but in her eyes, he saw gratitude. Hours passed. The human did not sleep. He sat near the fire, keeping watch, feeding it with broken wood and scraps of fuel. Each time she coughed or moved, he leaned closer, ready to help. The storm outside raged on, but in that small shelter, time slowed. The child drifted between sleep and sound to wakefulness. Sometimes she dreamed of her people's voices, harsh and cold, telling her she was weak. Sometimes she woke to see the man, sitting there, his torch leaning against the wall, his rifle near his side. His eyes always returned to her, making sure she still breathed. At one point, she whispered again, her words trembling. He leaned closer and heard a single word: alive. She wanted to know if she was still alive. Yes, he said softly, though she could not understand. You're alive. The firelight danced against the walls. His shadow and hers lay side by side on the floor, two different beings bound together by the fragile spark of survival. But outside, the storm was not their only enemy. Far away in the snow, other sounds moved. Deep growls echoed across the frozen valley. The child heard them even in her weak state. Her eyes widened, and she gripped his sleeve tightly, whispering with fear. He frowned. He could not understand her words, but her terror was clear. Something was out there, something dangerous. He loaded his rifle, checking the few bullets he had left. His supplies were limited. If danger came, he could not fight forever. But he looked at the child beside him, her glowing eyes filled with fear, and he knew one thing: he would not let her fall to the ice again. The night passed slowly. The storm eased a little, and for the first time, the stars appeared through cracks in the clouds. The human opened the shelter door slightly, breathing in the cold air, and saw the white land glowing under the moon. It looked calm, but he knew danger often came in silence. He shut the door and returned to her side. She stirred again, her hand twitching, her lips moving. Finally, she managed to form broken words in his language. Her accent was strange, but he understood. Why, save me? He froze. She had spoken his tongue, even if broken. For a moment, he could not answer. He could have said it was duty. He could have said it was chance, but the truth was simple. No one deserves to "Oh, die alone," he whispered. Her eyes filled with tears. She closed them, clutching the blanket tightly, and for the first time in her life, she felt warmth, not only in her body, but in her heart. The storm might return, the danger might grow, but something new had been born in that shelter. A fragile spark, life, hope, and a bond between human and alien that refused to be extinguished. The fire of life. The storm had calmed, but the silence after was almost heavier than the roar of the wind. Snow still pressed against the walls of the shelter, and the air smelled of smoke and melting ice. The fire burned low, casting a golden glow across the rough floor. The human sat beside it, his tired eyes fixed on the child. She lay wrapped in his heavy coat, her small chest rising and falling with effort. The warmth had saved her life for now, but her body was still weak. Her lips were pale and her hands trembled when she tried to move. He leaned closer, offering her more water. She drank slowly, her glowing eyes half open. For a long moment they stared at each other. Two beings from different worlds, connected by nothing but survival. The human spoke quietly, even though he knew she might not understand. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Don't give up now." The girl blinked. She tried to respond, her words broken and heavy with accent. "Whew, man," she whispered. "Why? Give fire? To me?" He almost smiled. She was trying, reaching through the barrier of language. He pointed to the fire, then placed his hand gently on his chest. "Life," he said simply. Her eyes widened a little, as if she understood. She coughed weakly and closed her eyes, but her lips formed the same word. Life. For hours, the man kept the fire alive. He broke frozen branches, fed them into the flames, and rubbed his hands to keep them warm. The girl dozed in and out of sleep, her mind lost bet. Wean dreams and reality. Sometimes she dreamed of her people, the ones who had abandoned her. She remembered their cold eyes, their harsh words. "Too weak," they had said. "She will only slow us down." Other times, she dreamed of strange warmth, of the fire in the human's steady hands. It was something her people had never given her, protection without asking for anything in return. When she woke again, she found him sitting near her, holding a small pan above the fire. A smell filled the room. Simple food, but warm. He broke the food into small pieces and held one to her lips. She hesitated, her pride still clinging to her, but hunger was stronger. Slowly she opened her mouth, and he placed the food gently inside. She chewed with effort, her small hands clutching the blanket. "Good," he whispered, nodding. "Good." Her alien ears twitched at the sound of his voice. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the feeling. Each time he spoke, it felt steady, like a shield against the cold world outside. For the first time, the child asked something without fear. "Why not leave me?" she whispered. The question struck him. He looked into her glowing eyes, silent for a moment. The truth was simple, but heavy. "Because I couldn't," he said. She stared at him confused. In her world, no one helped the weak. Strength was all that mattered. Yet here was a man who had no reason to save her. Yet he fought the storm for her, gave her his coat, and shared his food. Tears slid down her cheeks, hot against her frozen skin. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed. Not strong," she said, her voice trembling. The human reached forward, gently lowering her hands. "Strong is not never falling," he said. "Strong is standing again, even when the world wants you down." She did not understand all the words, but the fire in his eyes told her everything. The flames burned brighter, filling the small room with warmth. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, a strange bond was forming. The child curled closer. To the fire, her eyes soft now instead of afraid. Her small hand reached out, almost without thought, and touched his sleeve again. This time, she did not let go. The human did not move his arm away. He simply sat there, his presence steady and unshaken. But then, a sound pierced the silence. The girl's body stiffened, her hand tightening on his sleeve. She knew that sound. A distant howl, sharp and cruel, echoing through the frozen night. Her people had spoken of them, hunters of the snow, beasts that followed weakness and fed on the lost. Her glowing eyes filled with fear. She whispered quickly in her tongue, pointing toward the walls of the shelter. He could not understand the words, but he saw the terror in her face. The human picked up his rifle and checked the bullets. Only a few left. He frowned, but did not show fear. "Don't worry," he said firmly, even though she might not understand. "They won't take you." The fire crackled. The child stared at him, her fear slowly mixing with something else. Trust. She whispered one last word before drifting back into uneasy sleep. "Promise?" The human looked down at her, the firelight burning in his eyes. "I promise," he said. Outside, the snow was quiet, but in the distance the hunters were moving closer, and the human knew the real fight for life had only just begun. The hunter's call. The fire inside the shelter burned low, its light soft against the cold stone walls. The alien child slept lightly, curled under the thick coat, her breathing uneven but steadier than before. Beside her, the human sat awake, his rifle across his knees, his ears alert. He had been a soldier once, and even though this world was far from the battlefields he knew, danger always sounded the same. Outside, through the cracks in the storm, he had heard it, low roars, echoing over the frozen valley. They were not the cries of wind, they were alive. The child stirred in her sleep, her small hand twitching. A whimper escaped her lips. Then she gasped awake, her glowing eyes wide with fear. She looked at him, then toward the door, whispering fast in her tongue. He could not understand the words, but he understood the fear. She shook her head, clutching his sleeve. Finally, she managed to say one word in broken human language. "Hunters." The man's grip on his rifle tightened. Hunters. He had heard stories whispered by traders, creatures that ruled the icy plains, predators with senses sharp enough to smell weakness, to track fear. They hunted the abandoned, the sick, the wounded, and now they had caught the child's scent. The human stood and checked his supplies, only a few bullets left. His knife was sharp but small. He glanced at the fire, then at the door. The wood would not stop a real attack. The girl trembled, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, but her voice was weak. "They come." He knelt beside her and rested a hand on her shoulder. His voice was steady. "They'll find me here, not you. I won't let them touch you." She stared at him in silence. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Her people had abandoned her the moment she showed weakness. Yet this human, a stranger, was choosing to stand. Outside, the storm calmed for a moment. The silence was worse than the wind. Every creak of ice, every distant crunch made the air feel heavy. Then, faintly, came the sound again. A howl, long and sharp, answered by another and then another. The hunters were calling to each other. They were closing in. The child's heart pounded. She whispered something in her tongue, tears slipping down her cheeks. The human could not understand the words, but he caught the meaning. She was telling him to leave her, to save himself. He shook his head firmly. "Not while I'm here," he said. Her eyes widened. She could not believe it. The man stood, moving to the door. He pressed his ear against it, steaming. The snow outside shifted. Heavy bodies moved, circling. Shadows passed by the cracks of light. His pulse quickened, but his mind remained cold, trained. He returned to her side. "Stay quiet," he whispered, holding a finger to his lips. She nodded quickly, holding her breath. The first strike came suddenly. A loud crash against the wall shook the entire shelter. The girl gasped, covering her mouth. The human raised his rifle, aiming at the door. A second crash followed, then claws scraped against the wood, searching for a way inside. He whispered low, more to himself than to her. "They're testing us." The child clutched his coat, her eyes wide with terror. She whispered again, her voice breaking. "They never stop." Another howl cut through the night. This time, it was closer, right outside. The fire flickered, throwing long shadows on the wall. The human steadied his breathing, finger on the trigger. The door shook violently, snow falling from the ceiling. The hunters were strong. He fired once. The crack of the shot echoed, followed by a deep roar of pain. For a moment, there was silence, then chaos. The hunters outside snarled and slammed into the door again, harder than before. The girl cried out, but he pulled her close, shielding her with his body. "Stay down," he ordered. Another roar, another crash. The door splintered slightly. He knew it would not hold for long. His bullets were few. If they broke through, he would be forced to fight hand to hand. The girl buried her face against his chest, trembling. "Go," she whispered. "Go. Leave me." He looked down at her, his expression hard, his voice steady. "I made you a promise." The shelter shook again. Wood cracked. Snow and cold air rushed inside through a gap. The hunter's glowing eyes appeared in the dark outside, moving closer. The man raised his rifle again, his jaw set. The child clung to him, her small voice lost in the storm of roars and crashes. And then, the fire flared suddenly. The girl's body glowed brighter, a faint light, spreading across her skin. She didn't notice at first, but the human did. His eyes widened, her hands shook, and sparks of strange energy danced at her fingertips. She looked down at herself in shock. Her people had told her she was weak, useless. But now, something inside her was awakening. The hunters roared again, preparing for the final strike. The door bent under their weight, moments from breaking. The man tightened his grip on the rifle, ready to fight. But in his arms, the child's light grew brighter. She stared at him, her voice trembling. "They fear me." The hunter's call echoed one last time across the frozen valley, louder, closer, shaking the walls. And inside the shelter, the fire of survival turned into something far greater. The last stand in the snow. The door shook again, splinters flying across the small shelter. Snow burst through the cracks, cold air slicing into the warmth. Outside, the hunters roared, deep, monstrous sounds that rattled the bones. Their glowing eyes burned in the darkness, moving closer, hungry. The human stood tall, rifle tight in his hands. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, every muscle prepared for the fight. He had fought enemies before, men, machines, beasts, but this was different. Tonight, he was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for the fragile life curled behind him. The alien child pressed against the wall, her glowing eyes wide with fear. Yet even through her trembling, strange light shimmered under her skin, faint at first but growing brighter. She didn't understand what it meant. She only knew the hunters wanted her, and the human refused to give her up. The first hunter struck. Its massive body slammed against the door, breaking the wood in half. A monstrous head pushed through, jaws wide, teeth sharp like blades, eyes burning red. The human fired. The crack of the rifle echoed, the bullet piercing the beast's skull. It howled and fell back into the snow. But more were waiting. 3 more shadows circled the shelter. Their snarls filled the air, each one sharper, louder, closer. The man loaded his next round, his jaw set. The girl screamed, covering her ears as claws raked across the walls. Snow poured in, the fire flickering low. She clutched the blanket tightly, whispering in her broken voice, "They come, they come." The human glanced at her once, just for a heartbeat. "They'll have to go through me first," he said firmly. Another hunter burst through the window, shattering glass and ice. Its claws slashed the air, missing his face by inches. He swung his rifle like a club, striking the beast across the jaw. It roared in fury. He pulled his knife, stabbing deep into its throat. Hot blood sprayed across the snow-covered floor. The child gasped. She had never seen such defiance. Her people would have run, but this man stood against monsters without hesitation. The hunter collapsed, shaking the ground as it fell, but outside the howls grew louder. More shadows approached, dozens of eyes glowing in the storm. The human's breaths grew heavy. His ammo was low. His arm bled from a slash, blood staining his coat. But his stance never wavered. He planted his boots firm on the ground, blocking the girl with his body. The child's light flickered again, stronger now, spreading from her chest to her hands. She looked down at them in shock. Sparks of energy danced across her fingers, glowing like fire but cold as ice. "I don't want," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks, "to be weak." The human turned his head slightly, his voice hard, commanding, "Then don't. Stand with me." The hunters charged. The door shattered completely, wood exploding inward. 2 massive beasts leapt through the opening, their jaws snapping. The human fired his last bullets, dropping one, but the other rushed forward. He pushed the girl aside and raised his knife, meeting the beast head-on. The clash was brutal. The hunter's claws tore at his arm, his knife slashed deep into its neck. He grunted, blood running down his face, but he refused to fall. He shoved his shoulder into the beast, forcing it back toward the fire. Flames licked its fur, and it howled in pain. The child screamed, her small body shaking uncontrollably. Her light burst brighter, filling the shelter with blinding glow. She fell to her knees, hands raised. Energy rippled out from her, raw and wild. The hunters outside froze, their roars turning into uneasy growls. Even the beast fighting the man stopped for a moment, its eyes darting toward her. The girl's voice, weak yet filled with strange power, echoed in the room. No more, no more. A wave of energy exploded from her tiny hands. The storm outside twisted, snow lifting into the air like a living wall. The hunters stumbled back, their howls turning into cries of fear. Their glowing eyes vanished one by one into the night, fleeing from the light that burned in the child. The shelter shook as the last wave of energy spread out, then silence fell. The storm calmed, the growls faded, and the air grew still again. The girl collapsed, her body trembling, the light fading slowly from her skin. She panted heavily, her chest rising and falling. The human dropped his knife, stumbling to her side. His arms bled, his face cut, but his eyes were steady. He knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms. "You did it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're stronger than you know." She looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with tears. Her voice cracked. "They feared me." He nodded, brushing her hair back from her face. "They should." For the first time the child smiled, weak but real. She closed her eyes, leaning against him. The fire burned low, the shelter broken, but for now, they had survived. The night was not over. More danger would come. But tonight, in the snow, a fragile child had stood against death, and a human had stood with her. Together, they had made their last stand, and won. The child's secret. The shelter smelled of smoke and blood. The broken door hung loose, snow blowing in through the cracks. The fire was nothing but glowing embers now, faint and weak. The human sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his arm bleeding, his chest heavy with exhaustion. In his arms, the alien child stirred. Her small body still glowed faintly, but the bright burst of light from earlier had faded. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with both fear and confusion. She had no memory of how the power had come, only that it had saved them both. The human looked down at her. His voice was soft but tired. "You saved us." She blinked slowly, shaking her head. Her voice trembled. "No, dangerous." He frowned. "Dangerous? To them, maybe. Not to me." The child sat up weakly, wrapping the coat tighter around her shoulders. She glanced at her hands, still glowing faintly. The memory of the hunter's fear came back to her. For the first time, she realized why her people had cast her out. "They not leave me, because weak," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They leave, because power." The human stiffened. He leaned forward, trying to understand. "What do you mean?" Her glowing eyes filled with tears. She looked at him, her words broken but heavy. Born with curse. Power. Too strong. My people fear me. They say I bring death." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For years she had believed she was weak, unwanted, a burden. But the truth was worse. She had been feared. Not for weakness, but for strength. The human placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. "That's not a curse," he said. "That's a gift." She shook her head violently. "No. Hunters follow me. Storm foe. Lo me. People hate me. I bring danger." His eyes hardened. "You didn't bring danger. You faced it. And you're still alive. That's not weakness. That's survival." The girl lifted her face slowly, her tears shining in the faint firelight. No one had ever spoken to her like that. To her people, she had been nothing but a shadow of fear. But this human looked at her as if she mattered. He reached into his pack, pulling out clean cloth. With slow care, he wrapped the wound on his arm. She watched him silently, guilt filling her heart. She whispered, almost too soft to hear, "You hurt. Because me." He looked at her, then chuckled quietly. "I've been hurt for less. You're worth the fight." Her eyes widened. She stared at him, trying to understand. Worth? To someone? The firelight flickered, and outside, the world was quiet again. For the first time since the storm began, silence did not feel like death. It felt like peace. But peace never lasted long. The child suddenly sat up straighter, her body tense. Her glowing eyes darted to the broken door. She whispered in fear, "They come again." The human grabbed his rifle, but he had no bullets left. His jaw tightened. More hunters? She shook her head quickly. Not hunters. People. His brows furrowed. Through the snow, shadows moved. Taller, straighter, not beasts. Figures walking across the frozen valley, their steps heavy and purposeful. Weapons gleamed faintly under the moonlight. Her voice cracked. My people. They find me. The human stood, his muscles tense. Your people? They left you to die. Why are they here now? The child's body trembled, her light flickering nervously. She hugged herself, her voice almost a whisper. They know. I live. They come. To end me. The man's stomach tightened. It made sense. If her power frightened them, they could not risk her surviving. They had left her for the ice, but now, after her light had burned through the storm, they knew she had awakened, and they feared what she might become. The girl buried her face in her knees, sobbing. They kill me. They always said, I bring ruin. The human knelt in front of her, gripping her shoulders firmly. His voice was low but strong, cutting through her fear. Listen to me. You're not ruin. You're life. You saved both of us tonight. If they can't see that, then they're blind. She shook her head, tears falling freely. They never stop. They never forgive. He met her eyes with iron resolve. Then let them try. They'll have to go through me first. Her breath caught. No one had ever stood for her. No one had ever said those words. Slowly, her trembling eased, her tears softening. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe she wasn't meant to die in the ice. Maybe she was meant for something more. The figures outside grew closer, their voices echoing across the frozen plain. The human tightened his grip on his knife, ready for the next fight. The child touched his arm gently, her glowing eyes filled with both fear and determination. Her voice was small, but steady. Not alone? He shook his head. Not anymore. The wind howled once more, carrying the voices of her people closer. But inside the broken shelter, a decision had been made. The human would not abandon her. And the child, once cast out and left to die, now had a secret, one that could change everything. Her people had feared her power, but with the human beside her, she no longer feared herself. And as the snow fell silently outside, the fire inside her heart burned brighter than ever. A bond in the ice. The frozen world was silent again, but silence did not mean safety. Outside, shadows moved across the snow. The child's people had come, their tall forms wrapped in heavy cloaks, their weapons glowing faintly in the dark, their voices carried on the wind, sharp and commanding. Inside the broken shelter, the human stood with his knife ready. His rifle was useless now, empty of bullets. Blood stained his coat, but his eyes were sharp, his body strong. Behind him, the alien child sat trembling, her glowing eyes fixed on the door. She knew what was coming. Her people had not returned to take her home. They had come to erase her. To them, she was not a child. She was a threat. Tears welled in her eyes. Her voice broke as she whispered, They end me. The human turned to her. His expression was calm, but his voice carried iron. Not while I stand. The door creaked as footsteps crunched closer. The child's body glowed faintly again, her fear waking the power within. She shook her head violently. No, if I fight, they hate more. If I shine, they fear more. He knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders firmly. His words were slow, simple, but strong. Listen, you are not what they say. You are not curse. You are life. You are hope. And you are not alone anymore. Her lips trembled. Hope? Yes, he said, his eyes steady. Hope. A loud knock struck the door. The girl flinched. A deep voice spoke in her language, commanding her to come out. She understood every word. Her people promised her no pain, only peace. But she knew their peace meant death. The human stood, moving to the doorway. He opened it halfway, the icy wind rushing in. The figures outside raised their weapons, but froze when they saw him, a human standing guard over the girl they had abandoned. One of them shouted angrily, demanding the human step aside. He shook his head firmly. Not happening. They didn't understand his words, but they understood his stance. He stood like a wall, knife ready, body unyielding. The girl crawled forward, peeking past his leg, her people's glowing eyes fixed on her. Some looked afraid, some angry. Their leader pointed at her and spoke with venom. She could hear it clearly. She must be destroyed before the power grows. Her small hands shook. She pressed her face against the human side, whispering with tears. My people. But they want me gone. The human placed a hand on her head. Then I'll be your people now. The words broke her heart and mended it at the same time. Her eyes flooded with tears. For the first time, she believed she belonged somewhere, not with the ones who cast her away, but with the one who refused to abandon her. The leader outside raised his weapon, aiming at her. The girl screamed. The human stepped forward, blocking her completely with his body. "Shoot me first," he growled. The alien soldiers hesitated. The girl's light burst again, brighter than before, shining through the cracks of the shelter, glowing across the snow. Her people stumbled back, covering their eyes. The leader shouted in panic. The child's voice rang out, stronger than ever, echoing across the frozen plain. "I, not weak, I not curse, I live." Energy spread out from her body, not wild and uncontrolled this time, but steady, powerful, alive. The snow lifted in spirals, the storm itself bending to her. Her tears glowed as she stood beside the human, her small figure blazing with light. Her people gasped, whispering in fear. Some dropped their weapons, others turned and fled into the night. Only the leader remained, trembling with rage and fear. The human stepped forward, knife in hand, his voice low. "Leave. She's not yours anymore." The leader glared at the girl one last time, then vanished into the storm. Silence fell again. The girl collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her glow fading slowly. The human caught her in his arms, holding her close. She looked up at him, tears falling freely. "You stay," she whispered. He nodded, brushing her hair back from her face. "Always." The fire inside the shelter burned low, but it was enough. Together they sat in the quiet, their shadows stretching side by side against the wall. Outside, the frozen world was vast and empty, but inside, something new had been born, a bond forged in fire and ice, in fear and hope. The alien child once abandoned was no longer alone. She had found a protector, a friend, and something greater, a place to belong. And the human, once only a wanderer in the snow,